So first, I want to shout out to longtime Wall Street for Main Street podcast listener Albert for pointing this out. And it allowed me to go back and do some more research on this. I spent over an hour today looking at this and crunching the numbers and trying to fit this chart in so you guys could see it. There's on the thumbnail after the video, after the live stream show's over, you'll be able to see the chart better. I may also put this in the Wall Street for Main Street Facebook group in a little bit after the show's over. So Albert pointed out a big data discrepancy between the St. Louis Fed or Fred data and the New York Fed, what they're releasing publicly about Repo Madness. And the data, guys, it conflicts big time. Big discrepancies. The discrepancies are so big that the Fed has a supposedly capped amount of mortgage-backed securities, or MBS, that it sells each month. So the Fed has been mostly adhering to $20 billion per month in mortgage-backed security sales. And earlier this year, I reported that the Fed was actually, according to their own data on the St. Louis Fed and elsewhere, that Wolf Richter, who covers the real estate market, have very extensively. And he said that the Fed was selling over $20 billion in mortgage-backed securities. Well, guess what? The daily data from Repo Madness that the New York Fed is releasing is saying that the New York Fed is taking as good collateral, sometimes $10 billion or more per day back in mortgage-backed securities as quote-unquote good collateral from banks, from these large banks. Sometimes, guys and gals, the New York Fed even claims that it is taking 20 billion, 30 billion per day, sometimes over 30 billion in the data sets. There's days during this Repo Madness program where over $20 billion per day was taken as good collateral in mortgage-backed securities. So here's how bad the discrepancy is. So as you can see on your screen there, according to the Fed's, St. Louis Fed's data, which is the Fred data on the Fred website, I have the link to it. You can take a look at this for yourself. The St. Louis Fed a year ago had that the balance sheet, the Federal Reserve balance sheet officially had over 1.6 trillion of mortgage-backed securities. Yeah, the discrepancy is absolutely enormous. It might be tenfold. The discrepancy is absolutely enormous. So both of them, in my opinion, cannot be true. One or both of the data sets is a complete and total lie or fabrication. Someone is lying, someone is not telling the truth, maybe both are lying. I do not think, in my humble opinion, that both are telling the truth. It just does not make sense. So, a year ago, the Fed officially on the St. Louis Fed website had 1.681775 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities. Its last official update in mortgage-backed securities was on Wednesday, October 2nd, and it had 1.467260 trillion worth of mortgage-backed securities officially on its balance sheet. So if you don't want to do the math, I did it for you. The Fed has officially sold, according to the St. Louis Fed data, $214.515 billion in mortgage-backed securities in the last year. However, like I said, the Repo Madness data that the New York Fed is releasing is painting a very, very different picture. So I don't think both can be true. We have a problem here. And this is why, and I've been repeating this ad nauseum, this is why you need transparency. This is why you need independent audits. And this is why the Federal Reserve doesn't want independent audits. This is why the Federal Reserve fights independent audits. This is why the lawyers at the Federal Reserve said after Ron Paul, with the help of, shockingly, of John McCain and Bernie Sanders, Republicans and Democrats, because there was a groundswell of populism from voters on both sides who wanted the Fed audited. Maybe the one time we will ever get a partial audit of the Federal Reserve in 2011, the GAO audit, which a lot of people in the gold community and on Wall Street and even Austrian school and libertarians admit a lot of them claim never happened because they're too lazy to do the research. It actually did happen. The one time in probably modern times we will get a real, honest, partial, independent audit, government accountability, GAO audit. Enormous discrepancy in data. There was multiple. Okay, so the reason there was multiple feds is because the New York Fed was viewed as the most powerful. Really, the New York Fed and DC Fed have almost all the power now, and that's how they sold it to other congressmen and also to some of the people, some of the business community that was okay with the Fed. So it was sold that, oh, we'll establish other Fed branches in the Midwest so the people in New York and DC wouldn't totally screw over the Midwest. That's how it was sold. But in reality, almost all the power of the Fed is through the New York Fed and the DC Fed. So there are other Federal Reserve Bank presidents, but the New York Fed has the most power, I would say, in DC. New York and DC are about even in power. The other Federal Reserve branches were sold that the rest of the country, especially the Midwest, would not be forgotten. That's how it was sold, as part of the creature from Jekyll Island. When in reality, this was the large banks were establishing a bailout cartel to protect themselves. So you have a situation here where the data that the New York Fed is releasing that was covered on Zero Hedge again today, where just today on Monday, October 7th, the Federal Reserve, the New York Fed, supposedly took in over $11 billion worth of mortgage-backed security collateral just today alone. And the Fed was selling around $20 billion per month in mortgage-backed securities. And a lot of these mortgage-backed securities are not really worth the paper they're not printed on. Yeah, the multiple feds is there for a bunch of theater, political theater. It was done, all the other Fed branches were done to appease the Midwest business community, that they weren't going to be totally screwed over by the New York Wall Street banks, and that it was a sham of an illusion that the large Wall Street banks were not establishing a cartel to protect themselves. So enormous discrepancy in data, unbelievable. I do not think both can be true. So shout out to Albert for noticing this. There's a big problem here, and this is why there has to be independent audits. Both cannot be true, in my opinion. I would love to see an argument from someone saying that both can be true. They both cannot be true. Because if the Fed is buying, some days, according to this website, and I talked about this last night on the live stream show on the Repo Madness update, that the Fed is taking in over $20 billion per day in mortgage-backed securities from large banks. And they're paying full price for these things. They're getting full value. The large banks are getting full value for these mortgage-backed securities. So we'll see if Zero Hedge covers this. I doubt they will give me any credit. There's definitely listeners who write for Zero Hedge who take my work and don't give me any credit for it. But this is the new normal in the alternative media and gold community. I saw an article that came out last week talking about CLOs that was, let's just say, using a lot of my research and not giving me any credit for it. But that's the new normal from someone who's getting highly paid in a research position and getting stock options from a publicly traded company. This is the new normal now in the gold community and the alternative media. A lot of disrespectful people out there. Okay, well, this is just a short little update. I will put links to the official Federal Reserve mortgage-backed security position and how they're selling off, and then you can compare the two with the New York Fed data if you want. But it doesn't make any sense to me. It does not add up. Something does not add up. And I personally don't think, I've been thinking about this for the last couple hours, I don't think both can be true. Okay, well, thank you for the birthday wishes, everyone. I appreciate it. And this was just a short little update. because I think it's very serious. Oh, thank you for the super chat. Ruck Bodgers. Was it Buck Rogers, right? It's a riff on that. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I may have something out later. We'll see. I've also been writing for my Patreon account contributors. I started on a new article only behind the paywall for on Sandstorm Gold, an update. So that may be out in the next week or so. We'll see. I am working on that. We'll see how long that takes. That will only be for Patreon account contributors. So if you want to become a Patreon and you want to update on Sandstorm Gold and all the good things that are happening for the company, like how they just put out a press release, how they had their best, a record amount of revenues for a quarter, over $25 million for a quarter, which puts them on pace for their first ever company record, $100 million in revenue for a full year. Pretty amazing stuff. Meanwhile, a lot of idiots over on Seeking Alpha are writing articles that the company is a mess. Just ridiculous. These guys, by the way, were telling people to sell the shares at $3 per share. The same people. Yeah, HSBC, no surprise they're laying off that many people. The stock price will probably go up. I just saw a tweet out about General Electric, that General Electric, even though General Electric put their own shares into the pension, which is extremely unethical, to put only most of the General Electric pension for employees, I think, is General Electric shares, and that they're going to go after the employee pensions now too. So the mainstream media is letting General Electric off the hook. There's like I've been saying for a while now, Francine McKenna has been covering this. General Electric has been fined by the SEC for a lot of accounting problems for years, and no one in the mainstream media, none of the coverage of General Electric lately has discussed any of this. The research, the background is so bad. It's all kissing up to General Electric to make sure the stock doesn't collapse. To make sure the stock doesn't fall anymore. There's no accurate background information on General Electric because Francine McKenna said it was disclosed in fine print inside their annual reports by the lawyers that General Electric has been paying enormous fines for accounting improprieties and accounting fraud for many years now. Okay, well, that's it for right now. Thank you for everyone for listening, and I will keep on focusing on the unique content that the other channels are not covering, although I suspect probably in a day or two there will be tons of people who will be taking this content and getting a lot more views and subscribers with it and not giving me any credit for it. Okay, that's it for now.